are all sorts of behaviours that you may feel are not great in public. Picking your nose, eating noisily with your mouth open, breaking wind in an enclosed space. But there is another on the list for a lot of people: coughing. You may remember this brilliant quote from the theatre critic James Agate, who once noted, "Long experience has taught me that in England, nobody goes to the theatre unless he or she has bronchitis." You know the drill. It is that perfect moment. Everyone's in suspense and the person next to you erupts in fits of splutters. But no more, it seems. COVID seems to have drastically changed our attitudes towards coughing and the amount that we do it. And I was saying that my colleague over on Radio 3 had an email alerting him to this. And I'm grateful to that emailer, to that listener. Maybe it was one of you. And with me now, and I've got many messages on this, which I'll also come to shortly, Dr. Kim Deans, who's a lecturer in clinical and health psychology at Swansea University, who's been monitoring behaviour trends since early in the pandemic, and also Professor Ron Eccles, the former director of the Common Cold Centre at Cardiff University and an expert on coughing. Kim, I'm going to come to you first. What have you been looking at in terms of our behaviour?
Hi, Emma. Thank you so much for having me. We've been speaking to the same group of people since the beginning of the pandemic, talking to them about their views, their behaviors, their experiences. And we've done it a number of times, at the very beginning in March of 2020, at the end of the first lockdown, during the second lockdown, the third lockdown. So we've really been able to get a picture of that kind of individual experience and how they've been proceeding. And one of the things that they actually brought up very early on, as soon as we started emerging from that first lockdown, is their feeling that if they coughed, if they kind of showed any signs of a cold, that it was perceived as a threat by other people. So something that before might just be natural to us, to cough, to clear our throat, is actually something that is now threatening. And there was a lot of view of kind of the others and me. So like this is those people coughing and doing something very scary, and that this kind of separateness came up a lot. The coughing was now a threat, which is very different, I think, as a perception, and it's something we've heard over and over again from them over the past year and a half.
Oh, and was that a surprise to you?
I think that initially it kind of made me sad at the beginning, because this is something that is so natural that is now perceived as threatening and is a kind of result of the global pandemic. I wouldn't say it's necessarily surprising in that people's behaviors and the perception of those behaviors change a great deal based on context. And based on the situations we find ourselves. And with the novel pandemic, we're learning a whole new set of ways of interacting. We're learning a whole new set of social norms. And the perception of something that as simple as a cough is changing.
Yes, and I mean, we've had quite a lot of messages about this. Some of them are very funny, some of them talking about how they may feel about this, and I'll get to those in just a moment. But actually, just to your point, there are people getting in touch who have to cough. So, for instance, Lucy has got in touch to say, my daughter has cystic fibrosis, which means she coughs more than the average person. Prior to the pandemic, people coughing wouldn't annoy, but there'd be concern in case of risk of cross-infection for my daughter. Now everybody is concerned with people coughing, and it's stigmatised, which isn't a good thing. Compassion and concern needs to be more in the forefront of our thoughts, not judgment and fear. This is something we've lived with for 11 years. So our understanding might be slightly more mature than the world experiencing the pandemic for the last 3 years. But I actually think we need to be really clear here, don't we, that this is about those who can prevent themselves from coughing. I think there is a clear distinction. And I just wondered what else, if anything, your research had found on this about people's changing attitudes because of the pandemic.
Absolutely. So one thing that happens when people are under threat or when they're extremely kind of stressed is that they start to protect themselves, right? We have all sorts of kind of mechanisms that increase to make us feel safe. And so the interpretation that somebody might make of the action of another is going to be kind of more threatening than it would be otherwise. Where in the past, if you hear somebody cough, you might not necessarily think it's due to illness. You might think it's due to asthma, to a pollutant, to all sorts of other things that can trigger coughs. I'm sure Ron will speak more to that, but now you might make that attribution very quickly that it could be due to COVID. And that does lead to stigmatizing. One participant in our study said that she felt like a quote unquote leper when she coughed out in public. Yeah. And quite unfortunately, there are a great number of people, I'm a clinical psychologist, anxious coughing is very prevalent. It's something that is there for people that are stressed out and anxious, and they can't help it. People with cystic fibrosis can't help it. People with asthma, there are all sorts of people that can't suppress.
I was going to say, for the purposes of this conversation, and I feel we've now covered those who can't, right? And,
Yes.
and we've got more messages to that effect. But there is also the other side of this, of those who can. And Ron,
Yes.
I want to bring you in at this point, because you've looked at this, and I'm also quite interested in the male and female differences and what you found on that. And if people have just managed to stop coughing, is that because you can, Ron?
Certainly, Emma, in that we've done so many experiments at the Common Cold Centre in Cardiff University, where simple instructions stop people coughing for up to 20 minutes. They've got quite severe cough associated with common cold. Cough starts with a sense of irritation from the airway, and we develop an urge to cough. And then we have a choice. We can suppress it for a while, or we can cough. And I can cough now. That cough is identical to any sort of cough associated with common cold or asthma or anything else. It's under voluntary control. And you mentioned the theatre. Most people, when there is a bit of suspense in the theatre, a love scene, they will suppress their cough. And then when we have the applause, they will all start coughing. They've managed to suppress it until the applause rate. So cough is under voluntary control. I would put an extra on that, in that cough associated with drinking water down the wrong way is more of a reflex. That's more of a reflex, but you don't have voluntary control over. But cough associated with diseases like cold, cough, and even with cystic fibrosis, you can decide when to cough and how strong you wish to cough.
Well, maybe some people would have a different experience of that, certainly that latter point. But in terms of what you're saying, just because people are noticing, and we're getting more messages, that the coughing has been able to be stopped or stifled in a lot of people, it's a fascinating one. Do you know the differences, or what can you tell us about the differences with women coughing and men coughing?
Well, obviously men are bigger, we have bigger lungs, we have a bigger voice box or larynx, and we make much louder coughs. So a cough from a man is much more discernible in the theatre than a cough from a woman.
I mean, they could be operatic, Ron. I mean, the splutters from the back row. I mean, I've never heard some of the performances I've heard.
Well, some women are quite large.
So wait, so men are louder, but women do it more? Or tell us about women.
Oh, well, if you're looking at chronic cough, which is quite common in the UK, and I pity those that Kim has now stigmatised, because chronic cough is quite a common problem, and it's much, much more common among women, especially women aged over 60. And we don't fully understand why that is, but it is a very big issue, and there are very little treatments for chronic cough at the moment.
And yet the theatres are quieter. So even those perhaps with that maybe aren't doing it. What do we think about that, Ron?
Well, I think the theatres are quieter, firstly, because there's not many people in the theatre.
That's a fair point.
Good point.
That's one point. And secondly, I think Kim made a very good point. People are stigmatised. They're frightened of going out with a cough. You know, you don't want to be trapped in a theatre or a cinema and you've got an irritating cough, because although you will be able to suppress it for quite a while, there may come a point when it becomes almost unbearable and you've got to do something.
Yes, there's a message here saying, of course we all hate coughing, but if I sit totally still for a time, I do get a bit mucousy. I know all the tricks about how not to cough, but some can backfire horribly. A slight tickle, if you try to control it, can become a massive, uncontrollable explosion. And we're also getting messages about those of you who have confronted people about the various sounds coming from them. During a very quiet, very poignant moment during an opera, my husband leant over to the man sitting beside him and asked him to sort out his nose whistle. The man had no idea he was whistling. I was mortified, says Lucy. Let me just come back to you, Kim, and a final word. Is there anything you could advise about stopping yourself from doing this, or what else would you like to say on this?
So this is really interesting. You know, I don't think I've ever treated somebody specifically for coughing, although it has been a symptom of people I've talked to with anxiety. But there is information on the internet if you want to look at cough suppression from the NHS in relation to what Rowan was talking about with chronic cough. It's something you can look up. Things as simple as sucking on a sweet during a performance helps. Taking small sips of water, if you can keep a water bottle near you, breathing through your nose, anything, because, the COVID cough is a dry cough, which unfortunately is also the one that you hear, when you're kind of nervous, you don't have that phlegm in your chest. So these little tricks are actually ones that do work for that dry cough. So there are tricks on there that you can kind of look up and try to kind of keep doing so you don't experience that reaction from other people. Because I know that, our participants have been approached. I have heard of people that have been approached, and obviously you're getting some in there.
We are. Our
Our
listeners are not shy about all aspects of life, I have to tell you, which is why I love hearing from them. I want to share this with you while you're both on the line and with all of our listeners. This brilliant message my GP friend said, in 2018, you coughed to mask a fart. And in 2021, you fart to mask a cough. And I think we'll leave it there. If you would like to keep those messages coming in, I would very much like to receive them. I think I might need that on a hat. 84844 is the number you need to text to get in touch, or on social media, we're at BBC Woman's Hour. Thank you very much to Kim and Ron there with their various expertise to the fore, which I'm sure you will be appreciating. But that's a great line. Now, yesterday, we spoke to the writer and campaigner, Julie Bin.